The idea of this session today is to explore the question, do scaled agile frameworks work? And look at what the theory says, what are the empirical evidence, what do they show, and what expert thinks. I will also add my own opinion on that. For each of these points, I will also provide a few links to the full account of the answer to those questions, including reference to the original sources, because we will try to go fast to have a quick overview on those things. But those of you that want to look deeper, I provide the relevant links. And I will finish with some hints on alternative to scaled framework. Excuse me. So a little introduction about myself. I'm Luca Minudel, and I work with a few large organizations that adopted Agile at scale. But today I would like to mention two of these experiences. One was with Ferrari, is a place where they have to have agility, not by choice, but by necessity, and where agility is needed in the whole organization beyond the IT. So for example, in the design of the car, in the development of the car manufacturing, or race control at the pit wall. The other company, the other experience that is relevant and I would like to mention in terms of agility at scale is ThoughtWorks. Last time I checked, they had 42 offices in 50 different countries, and the whole company is run following Lean and Agile principles. So this is kind of my experience in the area. I would like to start from what the theories say about scaling agile frameworks. And specifically, I would like to mention the theory of simplicity. There are many other theories, but that's, I think it's a good starting point. And the first bit is John Gall principles. John Gall principle says that the complex system that work is found having evolved from a simple system that work. And you cannot try to design from scratch a complex system because it will never work. And you cannot even try to patch it after to make it work. You have always to start small and making work first. This idea of a small and iterative increment refinement permeates the whole Agile and Agile at its core. You can look, for example, at the 10th principles from the Agile Manifesto. The principles say simplicity, the art of maximizing the amount of work not done, is essential. You can find the influence of John Gall principles also in the idea of simple design and in the software development practices in extreme programming. But not only in the code base, only when we look at the scope and user stories, this principle influenced the idea of prioritization, minimum viable product, and the Pareto principles, where 20% of the user stories bring 80% of the business value. When we use the adjective lightweight to name agile framework, this is also a place where simplicity has influenced agile, and also how teams and organizations adopt agile framework and way of working. One less obvious consequences of these principles is that you cannot have a recipe book that tell you upfront what to do to adopt agile or to scale. And when you are adopting or scaling agile, you cannot design or tailor upfront your scaling initiative. You cannot have a target operating model, or you cannot define upfront a predefined set of practices, because the path and the journey of scaling your organization unfold and reveal itself as you go, and it is in constant evolution and change. So There is another element that I would like to share with you, and is the definition of maneuver agility. Maneuver agility, it is a prerequisite to agility, and it is an ability that those on the ground doing the work should have. So team members, for example. Maneuver agility is to recognize which approach is best for the circumstances that a team or an organization is facing, and the ability to quickly shift to that approach. So when we look at the original Agile frameworks, such as Scrum, Extreme Programming, Kanban, Clear, Clear, and so on, they are all simple and partially incomplete. They are underspecified because they leave room for maneuver, and they challenge the team members and those doing the work to iteratively and incrementally experiment, learn, adapt, and evolve their way of working to fit their own circumstances. So those agile frameworks are intentionally incomplete. And since they have to learn how to adapt from the beginning, then they achieve this maneuver agility that they will enable them to adapt when the circumstances of the team or of the organization changes. Again, another less obvious consequence of this is that we cannot separate those doing the work, those doing the adoption of the scale or the scaling from those doing the work. People on the ground, team member doing the work, should be involved as key actor in an agile adoption or in a scaling initiative. This is one of the consequences of maneuver agility. So, because agile frameworks are intentionally incomplete, we need something more. And this is where the agile community come in help. The agile community is constantly innovating and evolving new ideas, and is giving us a knowledge base of practices and a set of patterns that practitioners and team members can use in order to find inspiration and to find ideas to evolve their way of working in order to fit their own circumstances. For these reasons, people in the team doing the work should have a direct access without limitation, intermediation, and filters to the agile community. Last bit of the theory, well, this is more a quote from Ron Jeffrey, that is one of the co-authors of Extreme Programming. And Ron Jeffrey quoted Chet Hendrickson, that is one that helped develop Extreme Programming. And they say simplicity is the essence of what makes up agility. So since Agile is simple, a scaled version of Agile should also be simple or even simpler. Now, I would like for you to take a moment and to think about the scaled framework that you have in mind, the one that you use or the one that you like, and think how much those frameworks are aligned with all this theory of simplicity. Yeah, we are.
Okay,
so,
go ahead.
The second part is about, it's about empirical evidence, and let's see what empirical evidence show. And in order to do that, I'm going to look at 8 case studies of a few companies that you see listed on the left side of the screen. So those companies have succeeded in achieving agility at scale. What does it mean, agility here? So here with agility, what I mean is that these companies are fast, dynamic, innovative, flexible, adaptive, and resilient. And what does it mean, sir? What is the definition of success? Yeah, success means achieving tangible and lasting benefit for the business, being successful in the sense that they are the leader of their market and their products are successful. So let's have a look at how they achieved agility at scale. So 50% of these companies, 4 of them had agility since the beginning, and they continue to have that agility when they grow later on. Instead, 4 of them at some point had to change their way of working in order to achieve that agility or to regain a level of agility that they had lost. What is the driver for that agility? We see that the large majority of companies, the 5 of them, had a bottom-up and a top-down drive at the same time in order to achieve that agility. Some of those companies started to develop agility at team level with the bottom-up drive in order to introduce the key concept and the building blocks. And then the top-down drive joined the bottom-up together. One company, instead, Amazon, had primarily a top-down drive. Many of you may remember the 2 pizza team thing that happened in Amazon. For other 2 companies, we know that they had a top-down drive toward agility, but we do not have any information that say if there was or there wasn't a bottom-up drive. So that is the question mark in the middle. Now, what these companies have in common in their pursuit of agility? Let's have a look. All of those companies grew their own way of working internally, and they are still growing and evolving their way of working now. All of those companies take explicit inspiration or implicit inspiration from the Lean and Agile principle and mindset. So either explicitly look at the principles, or their way of working is congruent with those principles, with 2 small exceptions. Amazon is known for having a demanding and aggressive company culture, and this is not aligned with the principle of sustainable pace and with psychological safety. The other company is Netflix. In their company culture, they keep only the best, and so they have a keeper test that goes against the psychological safety. So those are the 2 exceptions. When we talk about the teams, all of those companies use as a core component for their way of working, the concept of teams. The agile, what we know are the agile teams, so cross-functional, long-standing teams that build and run their own product. And there is a strong focus on autonomy as well as on the responsibility of those teams. Another thing that I noticed looking at all the case study of this company is that they all have an extremely strong focus on technical excellence. And they also have technical practices at scale that are inspired and rooted in extreme programming. So think, for example, test automation, continuous integration, trunk-based development, continuous delivery and DevOps at scale. Another thing in common between these companies is, and in their pursuit of agility, is that none of these companies, when they scaled, when they pursued their agility at scale, none of these companies used any scaled agile framework or took any inspiration by any scaled agile framework. None of them. None of them scaled with the copy and paste or imitation approach. What does it mean? For example, copying the Spotify no model or copy what some scaled framework tell you to do. None of them did that. And none of them use a cookie cutter approach from the team's way of working. What is a cookie cutter approach? Is that you decide one team, how that team should work, and then all the other teams should work exactly in the same way, same practices, same processes, same tools. None of them did that. Indeed, all the teams had a lot of autonomy to decide many things, not everything, but many things. And none of these 8 companies adhere to just one single agile framework, the basic one, the original one, or by the book. Instead, all of them implicitly or explicitly took practices and idea from many frameworks based on what was working well for them. The next question is, how many of these companies define themselves agile? Well, only 3 out of 8 companies say we are agile. The other do not mention agile. They just think about doing what works well for them. And among those 3 companies, none of them think about scaling agile. The idea of scaling agile or scaled framework is not the concept that is used in any of those companies. Now let's look at companies that took different directions. Company that went heavyweight, company that went heavyweight adopting a scaled framework, or went heavyweight adopting an off-the-shelf platform in order to replace some of the strategic component of their platform. So let's see how this company did. I mentioned 2 of these companies adopted an heavyweight scaled agile framework. The other 2 companies adopted an heavyweight platform with the usual promise. It will be an easy configuration. There will be only very few personalization. The migration of the data will be easy. And then it will be very easy to adapt this off-the-shelf platform to the changing need of your clients. How did it work? How many of these companies had the positive business impact? Well, from the case studies and from the information publicly available, we can say that none of these companies had the positive and lasting impact for their business. The 2 companies that adopted the heavyweight platform, they had very negative consequences, preventing them to achieve their business goal. And also the company value on the market was negatively affected. Talking about the company that adopted heavyweight scaled framework, one of those companies, after releasing 4 products developed using the scaled framework, had a sharp fall in the stock price, 65% down. That's how the stock price went and never recovered. The company growth was stopped, and business analysts mentioned that they noticed a lack of innovation. The other company finished recently, so it is too early to say if there are tangible positive effects to their business and if they are lasting. It is a little too early. Let's see what else do they have in common, these companies. Well, those companies adopting heavyweight framework and also those going heavyweight from a technological point of view, they did not have any bit of lean and agile mindset. When you read the documentation of the case studies, you notice quite the opposite, that the traditional mindset seems to become even stronger. None of these companies also had any focus on technical excellence. The one that adopted an off-the-shelf platform, of course, went in the opposite direction of technical excellence, especially when you do that for a strategic component of your own platform, a component that is strategic for your business. And not even the other that adopted an heavyweight scaled framework had focus on technical excellence. And this is a problem because technical excellence gives us technical agility. And when you want to achieve organizational agility and business agility, then technical agility is a prerequisite. So that's a problem. That was a problem for them. And none of those companies show any strong focus on the autonomy of the team. Quite the opposite, the team delegated a lot of autonomy to new layers of management. Now, it's important to say that correlation does not imply causation, both for the lesson that you learn from the company that succeeded and both from the lesson that you learn from these companies that did not succeed in achieving agility at scale. What we can do is to use this lesson to inspire the experiment that you can do in your own organization in order to see what works or what do not work in your specific circumstances. Now let's have a look at what experts think. We will look specifically to comments and critique to SAFE, but so far the theory that we have discussed, as well as the case studies and some of the comments of these experts have a general validity that goes beyond one specific scaled framework. While some critique is very specific to SAFE. So let's look at consultants that have a SAFE certification, including some of the trainer. And there is a growing number of SAFE consultants that they want to distantiate themselves from SAFE, and or they want to stop working with clients that are attracted by SAFE. One of the reasons is that because they do not recognize Agile in SAFE anymore. So this is some of the comment from former certified SAFE consultant. Al Shalway particularly is working for a company that it's his own company that was gold certified with the SAFE. But those are not the only one that have a negative opinion about SAFE. We find a leading expert in leadership and management, Steve Denning and Dave Snowden, but also Barry Boehm. You find him in your book of software engineering, as well as US Air Force express a very negative opinion on SAFE. But we can say the same from Lean and Agile experts, such for example, Mary Poppeldick, Chris Metz, ThoughtWorks in general, and many others. The overall opinion on SAFE is not that positive. And we can say that also for many of the co-authors of the Agile Manifesto. They did not express an opinion collectively, but they did express their opinion individually and publicly. And their set of opinions goes from extremely negative opinions to more middle opinion, but still negative. A couple of them told that they would want to see a few more companies that have adopted SAFE in order to form their opinion. But what you cannot find is one single leading expert advising to use SAFE. The one that had publicly expressed their opinion, they advise against using SAFE. Some of the reasons are that the scaled framework SAFE is too heavyweight, is top-down, is oriented to traditional top-down management, goes against agile mindset, and some critique is specific to some specific practices. For example, that they are poorly integrated, or that just they are second best or third best practices. Now, I would not like to hide behind the expert opinion, and I would like to share with you openly my opinion. But first, let me tell you why we are doing this, why today we are talking about Agile. 20 years ago, many organizations and knowledge workers like us was using traditional approaches to develop software and to develop digital products. And those knowledge workers and those organizations were finding out that those traditional approaches to develop software were painful and had an extremely low rate of success. This is when the Agile ideas emerged, and at the time they were pretty crazy, those ideas. But in the last 20 years, we had many examples of good agile that lead to an increased number of success in software and digital product development in several contexts and for several organizations. So the goal here is not to criticize a framework, but to answer this question: are those scaled frameworks going in the direction of the good agile that increased our rate of success in developing software and digital product, or are those frameworks going backward to a traditional approach that we decided to left behind? And let me continue with my opinion specifically on safe and unsafe practices. Just because it is one of the most heavyweight frameworks, so it's simply easier to pinpoint on the defect. But again, my general opinion is also related to all the scaled frameworks. The first point that I would like to make is about an implementation roadmap that you find on the SAFE website. It's very high level, but what I want to discuss here is not the roadmap itself, it is the mindset behind this roadmap. In this roadmap, you see an end state that is predicted in advance, and this goes against the principles that we mentioned before from John Gall about the agile simplicity. This roadmap also makes another implicit assumption that the end state is a fixed state where the change stops. And this goes against the definition of maneuver agility, that prerequisite of agility that we discussed before, that require that instead the company has a continuous improvement and continuously evolve their way of working. So from this roadmap, what I see is that I see mindset that bring us right back to an old upfront planning mindset, where the focus is following a plan over responding to change. The other example that I would like to use about SAFE in order to form my opinion is about one of the SAFE practices, Agile Release Train. And now I would like to mention Jim Hamdahl law or Jim Hamdahl argument. This law tells us that when we have the resources in order to increase the throughput of an initiative, that increase in speed and that increases in throughput is limited by the need of synchronization and serialization, specifically in this case of the releases. When we look back at the progress of technical practices in the last 20 years, we see that a lot of practices has been introduced to remove the bottleneck in software development, the bottleneck that caused by synchronization and serialization. Let me make some example. Version control systems or source code repository has been introduced to enable multiple team members to change the same part of the code base at the same time, instead of synchronizing those activities sequentially. Continuous integration has been introduced to enable multiple developers to integrate, build, and test the software autonomously and asynchronously, instead of doing this sequentially at the last mile. But more specifically, as an alternative to agile release trains, we have seen the introduction of continuous delivery and DevOps that enable teams to release asynchronously components of the software product. What agile release train do is going exactly in the opposite direction, and is trying to synchronize and to serialize the release of the product between multiple teams, basically slowing them down. So it is a complete nonsense. This is an example of a second best practice adopted by SAFE. The other things that I would like to mention is the way that SAFe redefined the epics. When you look at the redefinition of the concept of epics in SAFe and you compare that with the original definition in Agile, you will realize that they are defined in a very different way. And the Agile redefinition of epics bring back concepts that come from Gantt chart and work breakdown structure. When you look also at the requirement model of used in SAFe that really hurt my eyes, you see that that requirement model bring back heavy tape requirement documentation that start to become out of date the moment that they are finished. Usually this document contains a lot of irrelevant information and don't answer key questions because the person working on those requirements is not collaborating with the person expected to consume and use those requirements. Indeed, those requirements are handed over with a lot of misunderstanding, and sometimes they are used also as a written contract between those doing the handover. So this approach to requirements in SAFe goes back to a comprehensive documentation and contract negotiation, that it is in the opposite direction of where Agile has gone in the last 20 years. Another practice that I would like to mention is SAFe PI planning. So for those that are coming from a waterfall background or a traditional background, they do really appreciate the collaboration that is introduced by PI planning. This is a positive thing, but the positive thing stops there, because when the Agile planning starts, a lot of business decision and product decision has already been taken. And the expectation is that technical people will simply accommodate the existing dependencies. There are alternative practices that instead are focused on bringing together the collaboration between business and technology, between product people and technology, and let them co-create and co-evolve the product. I can mention Lean Inception, Google Design Sprint, and many others. Now, let me focus on one of the aspects of the PI planning, the idea of accommodating dependencies. We know from a Chaos report from Standish Group from 20 years ago that larger complex initiatives that involve multiple teams because of the dependencies have a lower chance to succeed. Instead, when we look at the Agile literature that has been developed beyond the single team situation, we see that Agile have found a way to align a team to product and service area and to the underlying architecture in order to minimize the dependencies and so to increase productivity and success rate. Not only the alignment of teams, but also architecture has evolved in this direction. Think about API, microservices, collective code ownership, or mixed open source model in order to reduce the technical dependencies between teams or to lose and relax the remaining dependency. So when we go back to this, the SAFe approach of accommodating dependencies, we go right back to the old school of program management and a top-down approach, where we need to add managers to handle those dependencies. And we are once again going right back in the opposite direction of Agile. What about roles? Well, these pair perfectly with what we just said. We have here an example from a case study from the University of Technology made on Volvo cars. And we see additional layers of managers added to the org chart in order to deal with all those dependencies. We see that in the PI planning as well as in the adoption roadmap in SAFe, teams are involved extremely late and they do not have a direct access to user and customers. So we are moving right back to traditional program and project management. To finish, I would like to mention SAFE as a book of knowledge. Well, if you compare the SAFE guide, more than 500 pages, to the Scrum guide that has 20 pages, it is definitely an heavyweight guide. But worse than that, most of the content that you find in SAFE, except for the practices that I mentioned now, are practices that are coming primarily from the Lean and Agile community, practices and ideas that the Lean and Agile community is sharing freely. And the digest that the SAFE offer is usually 1, 2, 3 years old. So it is constantly out of date. My question is, why refer to an extremely expensive and out-of-date digest of all content when we can have access to the latest evolving and innovative content from the Lean Agile community for free? After looking at the theory, empirical evidence, and expert opinion, I haven't found personally any evidence that Scaled Agile framework help. Quite the opposite. In the Lean and Agile community, you will find at least a couple of books of patterns that has been observed in large organizations practicing Agile. Craig Larman published a book, and then I know another author that is very famous in the Agile community. I forgot his name now. Is one that started the patterns community in Scrum, and he also published another book of patterns. What other ideas, what other things can we use as an alternative to scaled framework? So let me give you very quickly an overview. So the first thing, I'm going to give you some hints of things that the company can do before scaling to check if they really need to scale, because after they do these things, they may realize they do not need to scale anymore, or to set the best condition to start the scaling or adoption initiative on the right foot. So when you increase the number of people involved in an initiative, or when you increase the size of a company, the first thing that happens is that communication and coordination costs increase extremely quickly. A lot of people get involved in the conversation because a lot of more people is involved through dependencies. These require more times, but also lead to suboptimal technical decisions that in turn lead to more dependencies. And so the next time that we have some work to do, even more people is involved. Do you see how this is a vicious circle that is going downward? Instead, the suggestion is to increase your technical excellence and simplicity in order to reduce the amount of work, in order to reduce the defects and consequently time spent on fixes, and in order to simplify and speed up the work by order of magnitude. I observe multiple times companies where companies, for example, with about 40 people, 40, were doing a similar work and even more successfully of another similar company employing 500 people, 500. So an order of magnitude bigger. If the later company would have resolved their technical problem, they would not need to scale anymore. They would have about 400 people available to take care of a lot of new initiatives. So that is the first suggestion. Another thing that is a consequence of what we just say is to avoid bunching together unrelated problems. Instead, decompose those problems and remove the detrimental dependencies. Many times, especially from the business and product sides, we have this idea that comes from manufacturing, the idea of economies of scale. Whereas in software development, most of the time we have these economies of scale. And the last part is to align team service and the underlying technology so that teams can do more work autonomously end to end. After you have done that, then adopt an experimental mindset. Experiment, learn, and adapt your way of working. Where should you start? Well, we say this before. The principle that we already discussed enough before tell us to start simple and to make it work first. Make it work in the small and in the simple. And then when you have something that works, try to scale it. And when you scale it, find inspiration, not from scaled framework, but from Lean and Agile principles and from the theory of human complex adaptive systems. Let me give you some ideas coming from there. Create a safe to fail environment where you can indeed experiment, learn, and adapt and evolve. Align incentive, reward, and constraints to align the purpose of the team with the goal of the delivery initiative and the organization, and do the same to enable and orient self-organization toward positive outcome. The last suggestion is to scale collaboration. People, not tool, not processes, are the most adaptable element of an organization. So the most important things to do is to scale effective collaboration inside the team and cross team. And to finish it up, I want to point out to some resources. So in the coming conference, Extreme Program in 2020, that is the biggest European Agile conference, Giovanni Asproni and myself will publicly present for the first time Agile at Scale Generative Principles. And it's a set of principles that can inspire an organization to experiment, learn, adapt, and evolve in its own way. I want to mention two other initiatives that are extremely valuable. We have Organic Agility from Dave Snowden and Andrea Tommasini. This initiative have an extremely solid foundation on complexity theory. So for this reason is extremely valid. I would also like to mention the Fractal Work Manifesto and the related book, Introducing Your Invisible Manager from Andrew Holm. Is a book that is a tale about the theory-inspired journey turning around a failing organization and making it profitable as a self-managing organization. In the manifesto and in the book, you find a lot of good ideas about incentives, people, collaboration protocols, and tool and practices for scaling.